The young and the restless spoilers, a shattered plan and a hidden truth. The room was a cacophony of chaos, fear, and raw emotion. What had begun as a carefully crafted trap to neutralize Jordan had unraveled into a nightmare of bloodshed and heartbreak. Nikki, Victoria, and Claire had underestimated the ferocity of their enemy. Jordan had been cornered, but like a wild animal, she had fought back with a deadly desperation. The unraveling trap. Victoria's heart raced as Jordan stood across the dimly lit warehouse, her face twisted with fury. "You really thought you could outsmart me?" Jordan snarled, her voice dripping with venom. "You think I didn't see this coming?" Nikki stepped forward, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror gripping her. "It's over, Jordan. There's nowhere left for you to run." Jordan let out a dark, mocking laugh. "Run? Oh, darling, I'm not the one who should be running." Before they could react, Jordan reached into her jacket and pulled out a knife. Her movements were swift, precise, and filled with a terrifying determination. Victoria shouted a warning, but it was too late. Jordan lunged forward, the blade gleaming in the dim light. In the chaos that followed, Claire moved faster than anyone could have anticipated. Without hesitation, she threw herself in front of her mother, shielding Nikki with her own body. A sacrifice of love. The knife plunged into Claire's abdomen, and time seemed to stop. She gasped, her eyes wide with shock as the pain radiated through her body. Blood began to seep through her shirt, pooling around her as she collapsed to the ground. "Claire!" Victoria screamed, rushing to her daughter's side. Tears streamed down her face as she cradled Claire in her arms, her hands trembling as they pressed against the wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. "I'm fine, Mom," Claire whispered weakly, her lips trembling into a faint smile. "It's nothing, it's not nothing." Victoria sobbed, her voice breaking. "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't." Her words dissolved into cries as she held her daughter closer. Nikki stood frozen, her face pale as she stared at the blood on the floor. Her hands trembled as the weight of the moment crushed her. "We need to call for help," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The turning point. The sound of sirens pierced the night, growing louder with each passing second. Jordan, who had been momentarily stunned by her own actions, tried to make a run for it. But her escape was short-lived. The police, tipped off by Victoria earlier, stormed the scene and quickly apprehended her. She struggled, screaming obscenities as they dragged her away in handcuffs. But no one cared about Jordan now. All eyes were on Claire, whose breathing was shallow and labored. "We need to get her to a hospital," Victoria shouted, her desperation mounting. As paramedics arrived and lifted Claire onto a stretcher, Victoria refused to let go of her daughter's hand. Nikki followed close behind, her face etched with guilt and fear. A race against time. At the hospital, the gravity of Claire's injuries became clear. The knife had caused severe damage, and she had lost a significant amount of blood. She needed an immediate transfusion. "Do any of you know her blood type?" the doctor asked, his tone urgent. Victoria shook her head, her mind racing. I don't know. I don't think." Her voice broke, and she looked to Nikki for answers. "We've never had to," Nikki stammered, trailing off as panic set in. The doctors quickly ordered a blood test to identify her type, hoping to find a match in the blood bank. But as the results came back, a shocking revelation turned the night from horrifying to earth-shattering. The hidden truth. The doctor approached cautiously, his expression troubled. "We've identified Claire's blood type," he began, glancing between Victoria and Nikki. "But there's something unusual." "What do you mean?" Victoria asked, her voice trembling. The doctor hesitated before continuing. "Her DNA markers don't match either of you as biological parents." The words hit like a thunderclap, silencing the room. Victoria's face went pale, her mind reeling. "What are you saying?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "That's impossible. She's my daughter. I gave birth to her." The doctor held up his hands, trying to calm her. I understand this is difficult to hear, but the results are conclusive. Claire's genetic profile suggests another biological parent. Nikki's face mirrored Victoria's shock, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, of memories long buried. The weight of secrets as Claire lay unconscious in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines keeping her alive, Victoria sat beside her, clutching her hand. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to make sense of the revelation. Nikki stood silently at the window, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and filled with emotion. There's something I need to tell you, Victoria. Victoria looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion. What are you talking about? Nikki hesitated, the words catching in her throat. When you were pregnant with Claire, there were complications. You couldn't carry the pregnancy to term. I didn't know how to tell you, so I made a decision. I arranged for a surrogate. Victoria stared at her mother, the truth sinking in like a dagger. You lied to me? My entire life with Claire was a lie? I was trying to protect you, Nikki said, tears streaming down her face. You were so fragile. I thought I was doing the right thing. The fragile future. The revelation hung heavy in the air, threatening to shatter the already fragile bonds between them. Victoria turned back to Claire, her heart aching with a mixture of love, guilt, and betrayal. As Claire's condition stabilized, the family faced an uncertain future. The secrets that had been buried for so long were now in the open, and there was no going back. But for now, all that mattered was that Claire was alive. Jordan's arrest might have brought temporary relief, but the scars she left behind, both physical and emotional, would linger for a long time. And as Victoria sat in the sterile hospital room, she couldn't help but wonder what other secrets might still be waiting to come to light. The weight of regret and the cost of sacrifice. Jordan sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, her hands shackled to the table. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from tears she had tried and failed to suppress. For the first time in her life, Jordan Ward, the woman who had been feared by so many, felt utterly powerless. The realization of what she had done cut deeper than any punishment the law could mete out. She had stabbed Claire, her own flesh and blood, the granddaughter she had secretly cherished more than anyone else. Her hands trembled as she replayed the moment in her mind, the chaos, the rage, and then the horrifying sight of Claire crumpling to the ground, blood spilling from her wound. Jordan whispered to herself, I didn't mean to hurt her. I would never hurt her, but her words rang hollow. She knew what she had done, and there was no undoing it. Claire's hidden plan in her hospital bed. Claire lay pale and fragile, machines beeping steadily around her. She was alive, but only barely. Inside her head, even as pain racked her body, Claire's thoughts were clear. She had always been a planner, always one step ahead. This time was no different. Claire had stepped into Jordan's attack deliberately, knowing the consequences. To Claire, it wasn't just an impulsive act of bravery, it was a calculated move. She wanted to be seen as a hero, the one who had risked everything to protect her family. But now, lying on the edge of life and death, she realized the cost of her gamble might have been too high. Her body was weak, her vision blurry. And as much as she wanted to stay strong, a nagging doubt crept into her mind, was it worth it? Kyle's arrival. The hospital doors burst open as Kyle stormed in, his face a mask of anger and exhaustion. His usually composed demeanor was shattered, replaced by sheer panic as he demanded to know where Claire was. A nurse directed him to her room, and the sight of her lying unconscious nearly brought him to his knees. He stumbled forward, grabbing her hand gently, his voice breaking. Claire. What did they do to you? He sat beside her, his head bowed, guilt and helplessness washing over him in waves. The love of his life was fighting for hers, and he hadn't been there to protect her. Moments later, he stormed out of the room, anger burning in his chest. He found Victoria and Nikki in the hallway, speaking in hushed tones. Without hesitation, Kyle marched up to them and grabbed Victoria by the collar of her shirt, shoving her against the wall. "Why her?" he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "Why the hell did you let this happen to her? She's lying in there because of you. She's supposed to be safe with you, but instead, she's fighting for her life. Why didn't you protect her? Why aren't you the ones bleeding?" Victoria gasped, her hands gripping Kyle's wrists as she tried to break free. "Kyle, stop. It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" Kyle snarled, releasing her but stepping closer, his eyes blazing. "She's in there because of you too. Because of your stupid war with Jordan. Claire had nothing to do with this, nothing. She shouldn't have been there." Nikki tried to interject, her voice trembling. "Kyle, we never wanted this to happen." "Claire, don't," Kyle snapped, pointing a finger at her. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You should have been the ones in that warehouse, not her. You two are the ones who keep dragging her into your mess. She's paying the price for your mistakes." Victoria's guilt. Kyle's words hit Victoria like a punch to the gut. Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to explain, but the truth was, there was no explanation that could justify what had happened. Claire had stepped in to save her, and now her daughter was suffering because of her. "Kyle," Victoria said softly, her voice breaking. "You're right. You're absolutely right. This is all my fault. I should have protected her. I should have stopped her. But her voice trailed off as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "She didn't give me a choice. She threw herself in front of me. She wanted to save me. That doesn't make it okay." Kyle yelled. His voice cracked as he struggled to hold back his own tears. "She's the one lying in there, and you're out here crying like that's going to fix anything. Do you even understand what you've done to her?" Nikki stepped forward, placing a hand on Victoria's shoulder, but her own guilt was written all over her face. "Kyle, we'll do everything we can to make this right. Claire is strong. She'll pull through." Kyle shook his head, his hands clenched into fists. "She's strong because she has to be. Because you've left her no choice. But if she doesn't make it," he choked on his words, unable to finish the sentence. He turned and stormed away, his heart breaking with every step. The looming secret. As the doctors rushed to stabilize Claire, the results of her blood test came back. The nurse handed the report to the attending physician, who frowned as he read it. "Is something wrong?" Victoria asked, her voice filled with worry. The doctor hesitated. "Her blood type is rare. We're searching for a donor, but there's something else, unusual." "What do you mean?" Nikki asked, stepping forward. The doctor glanced between the two women, his expression grave. "Her DNA markers don't match yours, Mrs. Newman." Victoria froze, her heart stopping for a moment. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the doctor continued, "that she's not biologically your daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. Nikki's face went pale as Victoria turned to her, confusion and betrayal flashing in her eyes. "Nikki," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "What is he talking about? What does he mean Claire isn't my daughter?" Nikki's lips parted, but no words came out. Her silence spoke volumes, and Victoria's world began to crumble. Unanswered questions. As Claire fought for her life in the hospital room, the people who loved her most stood on the brink of their own unraveling. Secrets, long buried and thought forgotten, began to surface, threatening to tear them apart even further. Jordan, sitting in her jail cell, could only replay the moment she had hurt the one person she cared for most. Her regret was real, but it came too late. And now, as Kyle, Victoria, Nikki, and the others struggled to make sense of the truth, one question loomed larger than all the rest: who was Claire, really?